You're listening to Foodagogy, where we explore what food can teach us about becoming totally inclusive schools. I'm Angeline Aow, and I believe that dynamic conversations about inclusion, diversity, and equity happen around the table. Every episode, I sit down with someone whose relationship with food reveals something essential about identity, community, and belonging, the same things we're trying to cultivate in our classrooms. Whether you are wrestling with inclusion in your institution, a foodie, curious about culinary cultures, or simply someone who believes that every child deserves to thrive at school, you belong here. Thank you for tuning into these food-related conversations that nourish both heart and pedagogical practice. Let's dig in with my friend and advocate for social justice. So I'm thrilled to welcome Vicky Truong, an educator, community organizer, and founder of Pockets of Change. It's a pleasure to have someone I know here in Berlin who I've met in person as well. And I've also had the pleasure of being in a cooking class with Vicky. And she has a background that spans education, social activism, and also the arts. And Vicky uses food, especially communal cooking, as a tool for fostering identity, belonging, and inclusion. And with her work, she also explores how food can be a catalyst for deeper conversations around culture, equity, and social justice. So today, I'm really glad that she'll be here with us to share her insights on integrating food into diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts to create more inclusive learning environments. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Vicky.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for that sweet introduction. Very happy and excited to be talking more about food.
So tell us about you, Vicky. Share with us your earliest food memories.
So, I come from a very large family that most of them managed to migrate to Australia, where I was born and raised. My mother was born in Thailand with a Chinese heritage, my father from Vietnam with a Chinese heritage. So, all three Chinese, Vietnamese, and Thai foods were very much present in my home, which was definitely as delicious as it sounds. And with the family having migrated, we were able to continue a very strong bond with each other, and that was through communal cooking and eating together. So my early food memories were very much communal ones, and ones where not only did we just eat together, but we prepared food together. And it was a whole process of first talking about what we're going to be making, then people getting everything together, roles being handed out, and people falling into place to fulfill like this big feast that we would have on a very regular basis. And even the cooking and the eating and cleaning part was all very communal. And so my early food memories are very much surrounded by with family. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds amazing and sounds like a regular kind of I guess a routine habit of being with each other and gathering that you
Mhm.
have. And you mentioned that there were many different roles. Was there a role that perhaps you did more as you were kind of growing up, and has that role kind of changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, back then I was quite clumsy, so I wasn't really allowed to do anything with knives or too much heat. So my role and that of most of the children were to clean the herbs, pick them off the stems, clean the bean sprouts, pick each end off, things like that. But one memory I do remember, which is a core memory, and I think it was because, as I said, I was quite clumsy, so I wasn't allowed to do much of the dangerous, so to say, tasks. But I remember when my mom entrusted me to fry the spring rolls after we had wrapped like, I don't know, hundreds. And I felt so, I guess, proud that someone would trust me to do this. And as I took them out and they were cooling, I was handing them off to my younger cousins with a tissue wrapped around them. And I felt very much like I was growing as a person. And this was something that has stayed with me. And I think that I really love it when I can feed people and when people entrust me to do such an important role of such a thing.
That's beautiful. This reflection you had around the joy of feeding people and connecting in that
Mhm.
way. And also that, like you mentioned, a trust and responsibility to pass on this cultural heritage and wealth that you've,
Yeah.
grown up with and lived with all of the intersecting histories that are part of you.
Mhm.
And this brings me to think about, thinking of spring rolls, I'm thinking about like, food that's enclosed into a pocket, which, like what you founded is pockets of change.
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell me more about how you came up with this term like pockets of change. And because I know you're trying to really intend to use cooking as a medium for community gatherings where we could hold space for people, etc. So could you share what inspired you to intertwine culinary experiences with intercultural training?
So I think it's important to also mention my previous work around food was mostly actually focused on identity politics and also the East and Southeast and South Asian community. And we looked at how food was a tool to embrace our heritage, one that maybe we had pushed away growing up in a predominantly white society. And during those workshops of identity, we also came together, ate together, and everyone would bring a dish. And a lot of the times there would be a range of different pockets, so to say, or dumplings, as one might think about when thinking about East Asian cultures. And because I wanted to work not only with the BIPOC community, but try and bring a range of diverse people together, I thought, okay, pockets are something that I think every culture has, something enclosed in dough filled with goodness and love. And I'm pretty sure that almost every culture has this. I'm sure that I might come across one or a few that would say, nope, there's nothing, but that's yet to happen. And so I wanted to talk about identity politics with a more diverse group, look at it how it could be a form of cross-cultural exchange, and look at how it has brought my family, my very diverse family, together, and how it can bring other diverse communities together. And I wanted to explore that further. I mean, with my family, the proximity of our cultures is quite close, whereas with some teams or in classrooms, the diversity can be quite large in terms of cultural heritage. And yeah, I wanted to keep it open, which is why I called it pockets of change instead of dumplings or something like this, because I think it's the idea then only it allows you to stick to one kind of race, so to say. Yeah.
Amazing. So not only pockets of change, but really pockets of exchange as well, in many ways. Yeah, in terms of the interactions that you're striving for. And you mentioned that if we were in our own pockets, for example, then the exchanges only go so far because
Mhm.
there's a lot more that you could say, like we have more proximity to, like you were saying. And so actually, that wider bridging across cultures can
Mhm.
happen if we're expanding the people in which we gather with.
Yeah.
So that sounds like that was your intention to expand and to bring a diverse range of people together so that people have the safe space to and to do that in.
Yeah, definitely. I think that so I very much see change making happen interpersonally and not just on systemic levels. I think that it has to resonate deeply with people for people to really push change making. And that's why I thought that food could be a catalyst for that because we all have to eat. Sometimes it's a little bit more important what we eat to other people. And that could also be based on their cultural upbringing. So there's a lot of things that we could dive into about food, but I think that, because everyone needs to eat, and I think most people have experience with cooking, it allows us to do something that is very human while we focus on doing something that is deeply, yeah, that deeply resonates with us.
And the act, I guess, of also making something like a dumpling together, like
Mhm.
you're saying, we're filling something with pockets of goodness and like all the delicious things that can be filled within, or even the receptacle or the dough or whatever it's being used to put something in. It can vary so much across different cultures. And so
Yeah.
this very kind of specific culinary activity that you mentioned crosses, and like you say, you've yet to know of one that doesn't have something that is created in this way of like filling something that can help facilitate those deep conversations about identity and culture. So in your workshops and experiences, like maybe perhaps you can share some of the insights that you have learned or your participants have learned that you've noticed over the years.
I think that one thing that I really love when talking about different pockets is not only does it allow people to share their personal stories around whatever pocket that comes to mind from their culture, but it also allows us to reflect on histories. And I think that people haven't really considered that because a lot of these memories might have been created at a particular time in history that was quite significant for this person. But not only that, it could be a dish that was created due to, for example, colonization or famine. Yeah, there's tons of different reasons, but also because of migration and what ingredients are available to a community, and then what can be used to fill this pocket that still allows them to hold on to something from their culture, and pass it on to, yeah, the next generation that might have been displaced from where that culture is from. And I think that this is something that has been reflected upon and which I really love because it gets people thinking more deeply about food, and it gets people thinking more deeply about their experience as a person. And while they share it, the people who they're sharing it with really start to understand further about the diversity that they have and the connection that they have to this person that they might have not been aware of. And it could have been a little bit more shallow, their connection and understanding of the, so to say, diversity that is between the relationships. Yeah.
I love that, how with finding perhaps like a commonality of a theme or some sort of connection that this opportunity can make can deepen a bond with someone. And I think that when we build trust with people, that quite often it's through sharing moments of vulnerability or stories about ourselves that help us to build those connections. And if we're working towards creating spaces of belonging, we need to be deeply connected with each other to see that we have worth in a space, and that we find someone else worthy also in a space. And yeah, I love hearing about what you were saying about how you facilitated doing that with different people. And I know that you also work with organizations who then bring this to their organization as a means to deepen their inclusion work. And so what are your approaches, like when you are working within organizations? Can you elaborate on how this concept can lead to perhaps some intentional actions that will instigate broader systemic change in an organization?
So, when I work with organizations, the focus of Pockets of Change is to build stronger and more deeply resonating diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging cultures. So, in saying cultures, I mean that it really resonates with the people and it is something that they embody. And I felt like a lot of the times when asked to do DEI training, it was very much, oh, we just want a 1 hour workshop and a real introduction of it, or maybe just focus on one aspect of it. And I always felt like, okay, I wonder how much this resonates with people and how much people then want to continue carrying it on, and how much, I guess, how motivated do they leave to continue doing the work themselves. And I felt like, okay, if many organizations only have a budget for one thing, I would like it to be building a stronger bond between the team members so that they can really start pushing for a culture. And I think that in order for that to happen, they need to be aware of why diversity, equity, inclusion is important, and what aspects there are of it. And I think that for me, food was a great catalyst and tool for reflecting on that, because it's not only what I had mentioned earlier with the histories and stories and personal stories, but it also can look at how people communicate around food, how people gather around food, and how that might reflect on what is, so to say, normal to a person, and how people were raised in different cultures where, for example, how is a how does someone say something nice? How's feedback given? Is it quite direct or indirect? And to reflect on that with food, and does that reflect then again on how they communicate within teams, or how they would like to be communicated to in teams? And it allowed people to reflect on what might be the dominant culture within a team also. So it's looking at diversity in a way of cultural heritage, but that I think is a gateway to for many more aspects of diversity for people to consider, and realize that there is so much work and intrigue and depth in all of these topics, and hopefully motivate them to, yeah, perhaps do the research themselves and push for things themselves, and share things that they might find interesting or something that they recently learned. Yeah.
I love that. I love how you obviously are a keen observer of interactions of people. And it's really like an anthropology of food cultures in a way, like thinking about how do people communicate, how do people, give feedback about what's happening. And that's
Mhm.
certainly, I think, a tension of, personally, my husband and I, like, we quite often cook separately. So it probably says a lot about our comfort levels. And he can be like I guess a sous chef for me, but I'm not a terrible sous chef for him. so, so, yeah, so that really resonated when you shared that. And yeah, but also to think about like that how we embody those experiences. So the act of doing or not doing. So some people may have
Yeah,
very little experiences in a kitchen growing up. I
definitely.
certainly know that even the makeup of a kitchen space. So the first time I visited my in-laws, for example, the kitchen like had a door that divided it between the kitchen and the
Mhm.
living space, and also the space where one eats. And it was
Mhm.
then always kind of closed off while the mother was in there preparing. And what did that say about the dynamics
Right.
of that compared to the how you described your experience?
Yeah, and also
And
reflects
yeah.
on gender roles also, right?
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. And so much to unpack with just, the act of feeding people.
Exactly.
And with your experience as an educator, an activist, and a community organizer, what advice would you offer, say, a school that's aiming to bridge cultural divides and to promote equity among students and staff? Is this act of cooking together like one way of doing that? Yeah, can you tell us more about if you work with schools as well?
Yeah, I mean, I work in a school myself, and communal eating for me is something that's really important. And I always try to make the experience nice, so to say. So I always have snacks in the middle, water, and, try and make it so that the tables that the children sit at are mixed in terms of classes. And I think that while eating together, it's a great space where you can kind of just build relationships and catch up with people, and get to know people. So I think that, I mean, there's recess and breaks that the children are usually eating together, but you can even go further and have days once a week, once a month, where there are children who are preparing a snack or a part of the meal for the rest of the children. And it could be something that they bring in from their heritage, of course. One thing that is really important is please don't expect the children who are diverse to do the work of informing the greater school, the staff, of what the depths are of their identity. And you can definitely invite people, adults who have more experience and more knowledge and more perhaps readiness to do the sharing. And it could give children I guess, a sense of being seen if it's something from their culture, and perhaps empower them to also want to share something based on the reactions of their peers. It can be quite a vulnerable thing also sharing something that you really love from your culture and getting a mixed reaction. So I think this is something also very important to consider because, taste buds as children especially can be quite sensitive to new things. So I think that bringing foods from different cultures needs to be reflected upon and done in a way that provides safety for those who are doing it because it can be quite a vulnerable situation. You can also look at food in a way of histories and also look at food in a way of migration, of what a community is doing here in your local area, inviting them to talk about food. Yeah, there are just a lot of different ranges of ways of how to engage diversity, equity, inclusion work in schools, and how it can also, I guess, maybe bring more awareness of the community that the school is based close to.
I really value how you're saying that just the act of gathering together and sharing, what are you having together is a way to value a person's culture, identity. But we
Mhm.
need to be, as the adults facilitating that space in a school, that we need also to be responsible for how we do that so that
Yeah.
it's not on a surface level or a possibility of harm being done by exchanges that may not be very welcoming, and to be able to cultivate sort of shared expectations for how and to help the students to do that, right? So it's like it's an opportunity there to really, value, appreciate, to model what that would look like, and to be curious, and through that also hopefully then affirming each individual's identity so that
Mhm.
they themselves are curious to learn more, so that they have a healthy sense of who they are, so that as they grow and mature in their formative years, which are the most important years when they are with us in schools, that they are then feeling confident enough to be able to talk about their identity whenever they're ready.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that for those students who might be coming from minorities and people have zero awareness of what happens within their home, what foods are being eaten, I think that this allows a lot of awareness building. And I think that it can be a really wonderful thing if it's received well and very empowering. And I think it allows children to really be seen and not to try and always conform to the dominant culture. And, if there is any embarrassment or any sentiments where they feel like they want to, yeah, I guess, hide their cultural heritage, that could also be avoided. This is something that I really experienced growing up in predominantly white society, whereas food was my really deep connection to my cultural heritage, but it was always done, or was mostly done within the safeness of my home or within community areas where there are a lot of restaurants, and within these restaurants, people from the same heritage were eating. So I think that if you can do this in schools, it can be a really life-changing experience for some students who might not really feel seen.
Absolutely. I think we need to change the power that food has,
Yeah,
and what in a classroom or in a cafeteria is seen as normal, because what is normal anyway, right? And so if we could shift that narrative so that the vast diversity of foods and smells and ways of eating are more normalized and are more seen as the cultural way of doing things, rather than always having it filtered under a white gaze. That is, yeah.
yeah, I think that's what you just mentioned that I haven't really talked much about is the way of eating. There are people who use different tools. And I remember at the school I was working with, we had gone on an excursion and I had brought a Tupperware of noodles and I was eating with chopsticks, in which most of the students are very used to watching me eat this way and it's a very normal thing for them. And the newer students, one of them was shocked to came up to me and her question was, "Ist das überhaupt nicht lecker?" To eat with chopsticks. So I found that question quite interesting because as if it would change the way things tasted. And I realized that this act of eating in a way that was comfortable for me was also broadening her awareness of how one can eat and what can be delicious. It was an interesting experience for me, and I think that this can also be really fruitful for young students who have been confined in one culture.
I love that. I love how you say, like, maybe it was part of the intention of their question or not. But I love eating noodles with chopsticks and often eat my spaghetti with chopsticks whenever I'm at home as well. but like yeah. So a question about like is it not tasty? It's like actually I think it's tastier with the chopsticks, perhaps.
Definitely, yeah.
Definitely less messy for me anyway.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, as we come to a close, Vicky, I'd love to ask you, what is your go-to comfort food?
So it's not really a pocket. It's not a pocket at all. It is encased in a bowl. And I think that it resonates for maybe a lot of other people, but it's rice porridge, congee, or what I call it mui in Chinese dijiu. This is a dish that, you feed to people who are sick. But for me, it was my Sunday meal with my family. And it was really like the time where we were able to get together. I'm talking about my immediate family. My father was working a lot, and it was the only time we got to have breakfast with him. And so for me, it was always a comfort where we could all eat breakfast together, and also a meal whenever I was sick, and a meal that I often feed other people when they're sick. And it provides me it's like a warm hug. It really feels very much like it's just feeding my soul with love and care. And of course, it tastes really great, and I love the texture. And yeah, so I think for me, it would be moi, and I always enjoy feeding people it, and I love the experience that people have when they eat it, because some people, yeah, have never tried it before. And it's such a simple dish that my father said that it was actually made for poorer people back in the day when my great grandmother didn't have enough food. They had to stretch the food, pickle a lot of different things to eat with it. And so for me, there are just so many elements of how this food can also mean resistance.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us about you, your ancestry, the cultural wealth that you have, and are so generously sharing with communities to support them in bringing them together as well, and to create these pockets of change and exchange to to make the world a better place. Thank you so much, Vicky, for your time.
Having me.
Thank you to Vicky Truong for sharing your food memories, community wisdom, and insights with us today. Engage with Vicky and explore these intersections of food, culture, identity, and belonging further. You can find out more by checking out Pockets of Change and her personal website that are both linked in the show notes. If this conversation sparked something for you, share this episode with one colleague who needs to hear it. And be sure to engage with the Foodagogy Transfers resource, where you can dig deeper into the 4 big themes arising from this episode. Before you go, what's one idea from this conversation you're taking back to enhance your practice? Maybe it's bringing communal eating into your classroom, or thinking more deeply about how the foods we share carry histories of migration, resistance, and love. Share your thoughts with a friend, a foodie, a colleague, or student. Connect with me on LinkedIn and share your takeaways. We release new episodes every couple of weeks during the school year. Subscribe and follow Foodagogy to be kept informed about what's next this season. Until next time, keep nourishing your community. I'm Angeline Aow, and Dojesai, thank you for tuning into Foodagogy. Foodagogy is produced by EKG Collective, with editing by Jitani Hevio and Kirk McDavitt. Music by Paul Romain and artwork by Svi David. Special thanks to Trisha Friedman and Frank Jung for sharing podcasting expertise and encouraging the birth of Foodagogy.